As is his fashion, he's right in the middle of all the action in Washington and surrounded by grandiose announcements and hyperbolic sounding promises. But so one thing that just happened is that he's going to be involved in something called Stargate, which is alleged to be a big AI.
Alleged. That's a big word.
Alleged until it will be called alleged until proven otherwise. But so this is intended to be a big AI infrastructure investment in the U.S., sort of announced in conjunction with new President Trump. Please tell us about this Stargate project and why it makes perfect sense that Masa is right there in the middle of it.
Well, I had nothing to do with the timing, but I have to say, when he announced this and its publication day in the US, One Signal, Simon Schuster were very happy, and I reached for the champagne. I had nothing, anyway. So it's good. Now, the big numbers, he is a big numbers person.
Always with him.
He used to think 98.6 billion, was quite a big deal. Softbank Vision Fund. It's now 500 billion. What is it? Is it real? Answer, yes. Sorry, Elon. Sorry, Elon. Sorry, Sheelah. It's not. It's going to happen. Now, is it going to be 500 billion? It's going to be a lot. And he's been plotting this, ladies and gentlemen, for at least 2.5 years, when he was supposedly doing penance for losing out all that money during COVID and the options trading. Actually he was plotting his comeback. So what is it? It's several things at once. It's a plan to develop a super chip to rival NVIDIA's. It's a plan to get involved in supplying energy to these huge data centers that are going to be built to power and for the training of the computers, to drive the march to artificial general intelligence. And it's drawing on this portfolio, which I don't want to criticize the media in this country, but he has got stakes in 500 companies, and a number of them are both coming good, and they're going to be the model. They're going to be the companies that help train this. So there are several things going on at once. Last bit, as revealed in the FT last night, he is going to put 25 billion or so in OpenAI. So we can come to DeepSeek in a minute, but for the moment, he's definitely all in with Sam.
So let's just quickly, maybe back up for a moment and just give a little big picture introduction of who Masayoshi Son is for people here who may not really know. I mean, he's a little bit hard to define. Softbank has been, which is his main company, has been a bit of a mystery.
Black box.
Black box, one might say. People are a little confused about what it is. Is it a bank? Is it soft? What's going on? So could you please just
That's
give...
so corny, Sheelah.
I practiced that.
Yeah, I can see that one coming.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
But just what is Softbank and who?
Fair enough.
What?
You're quite
why is
right.
he important?
Because he is the Mr. Mystery Man, and he plays on that a lot. So here's the beginner's guide to Masayoshi Son. 1, he's an outsider. He's Korean-Japanese. That's third-class citizen in Japan. There's a lot of prejudice against Koreans. His grandfather came as an economic migrant in 1917. Grandmother came about 10 years later. And they're living under an alias, Yasumoto. Fast forward, Second World War, disaster, annihilation. The Koreans are treated terribly as well, forced labor. They go back to Japan, to Korea. They're treated as complete outsiders. They go back to Japan and they're in a shanty town. Masa, who claims, and I keep this brief, who claims he grew up dirt poor, came from nothing. That's a slight exaggeration. He was very poor for about 3 or 4 years. And he wasn't born in the shanty town, it was on the edge. And his father was a bootlegger, a pig breeder, a loan shark, and then he was a pachinko owner. He was the king of pachinko in Kyushu. So anybody who's got to read Pachinko is the great novel about this will explain this. Now, so the key to understanding him is, one, he's an outsider, he's Korean Japanese. Two, he doesn't want to follow his father into Pachinko. He doesn't want to go into that underworld. He wants to be liberated, and he goes to America. He spends some time in America, including at Berkeley, makes his first business venture, and then goes back to Japan. So he's absolutely determined to prove himself and be number one. The only problem is, and then we can stop, he can't get any credit. Nobody will loan to him. He's a startup guy in Japan, and he's Korean Japanese. So guess what happens? He finds a mentor, one of the most famous computer engineers in Japan, a man called Dr. Sasaki, who has connections in Silicon Valley, knows Bob Noyce, blah, blah. And the Sasaki, who's by this time in his 60s, says, I'll mortgage it. The bank can have my house as collateral in order to lend Masa, my protege, money. And that's where he starts in software distribution. Finito.
Now, he's the definition of a self-made
He is, and that's
guy.
pretty rare in Japan. You know, there aren't that many people who start up as entrepreneurs from nothing. And really, I mean, he's a big disruptor because he's in the software distribution business, and then he gets in the mobile phone business. Takes on NTT Docomo, that at one point was the most valuable company in the world. So, you know, he's got, this is being recorded, isn't it? Because an American friend of mine said, he's got the balls of King James. And I went, really? And then I realized that if you think that's actually a piece of historical anatomy, that architecture that goes on mantelpieces, it's a famous piece, if you look it up in Google. So it's got nothing to do with that.
So if you were to sum up his place in the business and tech world now, what would it be? It's obviously a long way from pachinko parlors.
Yeah, I mean, just we do need to say that, you know, he's been in and out of the game. You know, he's lost and made several fortunes. So before we say now, I mean, he hitches his wagon to the internet. He starts buying serious assets in America. The Ziff Davis computer publishing business, bolts that on. He buys the Comdex trade fair so he can network with all the, you know, tech community. It's where he really gets to know Steve Jobs. And then he loses 97% of his wealth in the dot-com bubble and brazenly says, oh, well, I'll come back. I'll pivot to the broadband business in Japan. Sets that up, buys Vodafone Japan. That's really rubbish. I mean, the only thing going for Vodafone Japan is David Beckham. You know, David, he was on the marketing side of that. And then he comes back, loses all his money in the global financial crisis, buys Sprint, becomes a telecom entrepreneur, then does Softbank Vision Fund. So really, to answer your question, is look at him as a kind of Forrest Gump meets Zelig character who's somewhere near the heart of the action, trying to buy either a piece of a company that he really likes and thinks is the future, often at what many people would say is an inflated price, or a chunk, the whole of the company or a chunk of the company. And that's, then now we can talk about artificial intelligence. But that's the trajectory. Why does he matter? Because he's a serious consequential investor. I mean,
he doesn't make anything.
But he put 20 million, 80 million, 100 million on Alibaba. He stuck with it. And then it's worth 130 billion. So yes, you're right. He doesn't make anything. He's not like Steve Jobs. He likes to think he's a bit of an aesthete and a designer. Showed me his paintings when I was interviewing him. But you're right. He doesn't make anything. That's why the Japanese sort of a bit suspicious. You don't make anything. You don't manufacture anything. You don't do steel. You don't do cars. What do you do? Well, I'm a financial engineer. And also, he hasn't really raised money in the U.S. capital markets. You know, he's a different type of beast.
So he's like a kind of almost a salesman, and he goes around.
He's definitely a salesman.
He gets very rich people to give him
lots of money.
Lots and lots of money, particularly in the Middle East. It seems to be his big.
Yeah, he charmed MBS in Saudi Arabia.
And then he takes all these billions and he goes around.
Plays the table. I mean, he covers, if you think of it as a chessboard, he covers every piece on the board. And as he'd say, well, one or two of them I'm going to get right and I'm going to make a load of money. But he's also all about growth. So talk to him about profits and loss.
Well, so can I, okay, this brings me to something that I, so I'm going to read a couple of lines from your book that I noted here. Page 117. Growth potential was an article of faith for Masa, who viewed short-term profit and loss as a distraction. Big on vision, Masa usually left the details to underlings, page 120. So he wants growth. He does not care if the thing is just hemorrhaging money for years and years. He just wants to see it going up. Now, there are many examples of that model kind of not really working out.
Oh,
I mean,
well, what about Jeff Bezos and Amazon?
Well,
I mean, he took a long time to get to
He did. He took 20 years.
Yeah.
He made his investors wait until, and he lost money, and eventually he made money. But there are a lot of other examples.
I'll give you the example that best sums up Masa is was given to me by his father, and we're sitting in the family home. There's pictures of him with the son, who he's so proud of, and they're wearing baseball caps because Masa owns the local Softbank baseball team. And I asked him about his pachinko business. And he said, one day I decided that I needed a really serious pachinko gambling parlor. And it was huge. It was the biggest in town. But I had serious competition. So after the first week, I realized I was losing a lot of money. I mean, there weren't enough people coming through the door. So what I did was order the staff to fix the slot machine, so that everybody won for a week. And suddenly it's the most, everybody thinks, oh my God, the Golden Lion, that's where to go. So he said, we went up like that, and then I'm losing so much money, I had to fix it again. Of course, then the thing came down. So he did again, he bet that if he could just get the huge numbers of people coming through the door, if you like, total accessible market, TAM, which Masa loves, that's the model. And he'll take the losses.
So he does not object to being compared to a gambler in his business?
Well, I met him at Sun Valley on the first evening in the blazing heat this summer. And I'm thinking, what's he going to make of this title? Because, and I thought, well, I'll just do a sort of British journalist thing, being charming, and introduce him to my wife. And so, he was absolutely polite. And then he looked at me, he said, why do you write this book about me? Why do you write the book? And I'm thinking he's fishing for compliments. So I said, well, you're the most amazing, gambling, He says, gambling man. Gambling man. I suppose I'm a gambling man.
Because he could have punched you in the face.
He could have. He's a lot smaller than me, and I work out more. Actually, he's a serious golfer, by the way. A very serious golfer, and he can also hit a fastball about 75 miles an hour. So that's on golf in his house, which is this secret location in central Tokyo. He's got a whole underground golf course that is artificial. So you get the sprinklers, so that when the weather's playing, you get rained on. There's a man with an umbrella.
Oh,
I mean, it's very Japanese, if I could put it, or very attention to detail. Anyway, I heard this great story that Henry Kravis had heard that he liked to play golf, so he invited him to Augusta to play around. And Masa went round, I think he shot 77, so 5 over par. And Henry looked at him and said, you've clearly played Augusta before. And he said, no. And he said, no, Masa, come on, you've played Augusta before. He said, only in my basement.
That's very cute.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's go back to a moment just to his early years, because when I read this in your book, I was stunned, actually, by the first of all, just the level of sort of poverty that surrounded the family at the very beginning. It was just really heartbreaking. But also this terrible, terrible discrimination they suffered as Koreans in Japan at that time. And this seemed to have had a really profound impact on him, as it would on anyone. And I almost came away with the sense that his whole career is just about trying to find acceptance in the Japanese business elite, and they still are almost a little bit
more than a bit
snooty towards him. You know, and there's this really powerful moment when the Fukushima nuclear disaster occurs, and he wants to help, and it's maybe a little bit arrogant. It's a bit Elon Musk-esque, like he's sending a bunch of submarines or divers to Thailand to rescue the kids in the cave, whatever it is. So he's like, I can fix it. You know, I'm God. I have all this money. But they just are so dismissive of him, and I wondered what role you thought that played in driving him through his career, because he's so relentless. He never gives up, no matter what setback he faces. And I wondered if it's, you know, on some deep psychological level, it's about healing that terrible rejection he suffered, you know, through his life.
Yeah, I think that the search for status and acceptance and respectability, and we could talk, actually he wants more than that. He wants to be seen as a historical figure. I mean, he has a serious Napoleon complex.
Yes, his favorite
figure. He said, you know, I'm an empire builder. And we can come to Napoleon in a minute. But the serious point is that as a young boy, and he was treated very well by his father. I mean, his father called him a genius, which is probably a mistake when you're talking to a 5-year-old. But he wanted to be a school teacher. But in Japan, back in the early 60s, I mean, you could not be a public school teacher if you were Korean. I mean, you could naturalize, you could take that Japanese name and naturalize, then it's a different story. But if you were going to be Korean, that was it. Korean, Japanese. So he was barred. And then he wanted to, he says, you know, it's recorded in several Japanese books, that he wanted to then have a training school for teachers. That was out. So I think being blocked, he was also, you know, he was attacked when he was some incident when he was at school. And I mean, just to have some idea of, you know, when I was tackling this, I needed a researcher. I needed to, because I don't speak Japanese. And Neil Ferguson, who's a very good friend, who was at Stanford, and I was going nowhere on this book. And you're way too kind about the book, because frankly, after about a year, I was getting nowhere. I mean, I was finding it really hard. And Neil said, you've got to have a researcher. So I found a researcher who was utterly brilliant. He had one disadvantage, which he was educated at Eton, but, you know, well, so, you know, quite self-confident, talked too much for a researcher, but he was brilliant, to be serious. And he could relate to this being Korean Japanese in Japan. I mean, that's why he went to school in England, and he couldn't take the prejudice. And so Masa, there's a story in the book that he's in the slum with his grandmother, and the pigs are roaming around, and he'd literally wake up at night years later with the smell of pig excrement. And when he told me this story, and I said, that's incredible. I mean, years on, and his mentor said, this is not a recurring nightmare. It's actually just a memory. And I thought that was very moving. And so he has suffered, and I think he really does want to show the rest of the country that he's serious and he's a big player.
Yeah, you can feel that in his.
Yeah, he does.
His need.
Yeah.
So.
An amazing ability to come back. I mean, you know, this is the 5th comeback.
Well, so yeah, we could talk about failure. So failure is a huge theme in your book and just in his career. And maybe it would make sense to start by talking a little bit about his investment process, because again, I was struck by this. He would just meet somebody and be sort of dazzled by them and pledge $40 billion. And then his staff would be left to kind of go, oh my God, like, was this crazy, or can we make this work? And sometimes they'd try and undo it. Other times they'd figure out how to sort out the details. And meanwhile, he's off at his next dinner, and that seems like an insane way to make big business decisions. I'm just going to say right now. But what did you make of that? The fact that he would be so.
Some of this is a bit of an act.
Yeah.
Some of it is absolutely the case that he just falls in love with people, particularly people with big mouths.
Men, by the way.
Men.
Let's be clear. Yes.
And it is a bit of it. There is
arrogant men. Yeah.
I said that without my lips moving, but there we are. But you're dead, Sheelah. You're absolutely right, and it's big mouth men. You know, the founders, people like Adam Newman at WeWork. I mean, he thought he was literally somebody who walked across the river without getting his feet wet. I mean, he just said, and Newman talked about conquering the world in real estate leasing, right? Office leasing space. He definitely fell for Adam, right? Quite a few people did, by the way. But, and there are others. And we must come to the Vision Fund is just slightly different because there's so much money. There are specific reasons why it's mad.
So the Vision Fund is the
Vision Fund, which is the investment. It's funded large. The bulk, 60 billion, was from the Gulf, 45 billion from Mohammed bin Salman, then Crown Prince, and then the Emiratis stumped up 15 billion. And that was the first Vision Fund. But just put that in a box for the moment. There are other times when, you know, Sheldon Adelson, he thought he could, if he was lucky, he could maybe sell Comdex. And he's the casino billionaire in Las Vegas. And he's hoping to get 450, 500 million. And Masa says, no, you know, I can get that. And he says, have you got the money? No. And then he offers him 800 plus million. Adelson can't believe his luck. But Masa's thinking, I can get the borrowing. I've got record low interest rates in Japan. I've got a favorable exchange rate. Plus, I've got a very valuable asset. And I'm going to be this Japanese guy in the middle of the biggest tech fair in the country. And I'm going to be the impresario. I'm going to meet everybody. I'm going to make deals. So that's the way he thinks about it. So there's a bit more logic, a little bit more thought than this sort of mad guy, right? And I really think this is true on the AI story because he's had 2.5 years to think about it. Now, very briefly, on the Vision Fund, that's different because that really is mad, and I go into that. I mean, you get Herman Namarula, a British entrepreneur, goes on the plane, hopes to get 50 million, gets 20 minutes with Masa, and Masa saying, 500 million. Well, I don't need 500 million.
No, he would almost bury these
No,
entrepreneurs.
you've got to take 500 million because he thinks that's, you know, turbocharged growth. And then I think the way the Vision Fund was structured, and I talk about this, he was, as part of the deal to get that huge amount of money from the Gulf, he promised a 7% coupon. So he's having to, it's a 14-year, 12 to 14-year fund, but if you have to pay 7% and get a return, that's quite a steep hill. So then I think there's a rush to push out the money. And it's so much money, it's very ill-disciplined, and it all breaks down. So it's mad.
So do you think he would research these investments ahead of time, and then the, hi, nice to meet you, here's $50 billion was
you talked about the investment process. I mean, I think he does do quite a lot of research. I mean, he doesn't sleep much. Divides his day into sort of 15 minutes, time frame. But he still will, he sort of goes by smelling the horse flesh. You know, if he looks at Jack Ma, and he's there in Beijing in 1999, and literally the meeting lasted about 20 minutes. I mean, Duncan describes it in his book, but I've had it confirmed by 3 other people who were there. I mean, Masa was the only one who wanted to back Jack Ma, and that's a pure gut thing. But I think there was a bit more discipline in the process when the likes of Nikesh Arora that he hired from Google were involved. But guess what? Nikesh lasted 2.5 years.
So he certainly made it seem like he was just walking in and he'd be sort of swaggering. He'd be dazzled by these tech bros.
Yeah.
And commit more money than they even knew what to do with, and sort of smother them with all this capital.
Yeah, it's like force feeding.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, like to make foie gras. Anyway, that's what came to my mind.
I don't think I really want to think about that.
Sorry. Oh my God. But so, so he got he was really savvy, or he got really lucky 2 times, right? Once with Yahoo and Yahoo Japan, and then once with Alibaba.
Once with Yahoo US.
Yahoo US.
He's out of Yahoo US.
Yes.
He then says, part of the deal, I'll give you 100 million, but then I want the Yahoo name in Japan. He creates a whole e-commerce business.
And this was very early.
That ain't luck.
And this is very early in the internet evolution, very good timing. And then in 1999, yes, he makes the Alibaba.
Can we just stop on here? Because I'm going to push back. I get this. You know,
against
it's a bit
what?
Of jealous, where it's getting a bit too chummy. So I'm going to play editor. Look, come on. It's not luck.
Okay,
Goldman,
well, I said savvy. It might be savvy.
Goldman had already invested in Yahoo. He hears about it, right? And he has a look. And he gives a bit. He's already inherited a stake because he's bought part of Ziff Davis. Very savvy guy, Eric Hippo, had bought into the internet then. But he's heard about something, and then he kind of doubles down. So that ain't luck. That's taking a gamble, but it's strategic. And similarly with Alibaba, it's not really luck. I see the potential of this business. I understand that China is going to exploding in internet usage. If we can figure out a business model for business B2B, we're going to kill eBay, blah, blah, right? So that's 2. Then 3, Arm. I mean, he bought Britain's best technology company in 2 weeks. We've got a naked government because there's Brexit, right? And he just goes in for the kill and buys the company. Everybody thinks he's overpaid. It's 32 billion, and now it's worth 130 billion. So, have I convinced you?
Okay. So maybe it was a little more than luck. All right. So
Allegedly.
he makes these very savvy investments.
Yeah.
But those are the 3 big wins. And then everything else has been sort of...
No, Sprint. He made a load of money on Sprint. He bought Sprint, which everybody, you know, and actually it was a duff carrier, and it had one piece of very good technology, ClearNet, in there. But he thought he could repeat the Japan play where you'd consolidate the 3rd and 4th player and then establish a serious 3rd force. And of course, what happened was the Obama administration, the FCC, blocked him. Now, he tried and tried and tried.
Grounds.
But then 7 years later, Mr. Trump's there, FCC change. They allowed the merger to go through. SoftBank made out like bandit, right? And similarly, he started a mobile phone company from nothing, right? He bought Japan Telecom. He merged it with Vodafone Japan, creates SoftBank Mobile. It's dominant mobile, right? Number 2, maybe, with NTT. So I don't think any of this is, I think it's quite strategic and quite serious and very different from the kind of jokey, if I could use a technical term, bullshitter that is in the popular imagination.
So, no, and he spends a lot of time fighting to overcome this perception of him as sort of unserious. But so, okay, so he's had these huge successes. He's also huge, but he's also been through, I mean, just partly due to the longevity of his career, he's been through some huge dislocations. First of all, in the market in 2000, there's like a huge tech meltdown.
He lost 97% of his wealth.
2008, there's a giant financial crisis based in the U.S., but it's global.
You exported it, didn't you? Yeah.
Me personally?
Just Morocco. Anyway, go on.
No, it was everywhere, but obviously. But it certainly seemed to have a...
It's born in the USA.
It definitely, subprime mortgage CDOs definitely seem to be born here.
Yeah, so he definitely got very badly hurt.
He got very badly hurt, as many people did, but he was always borrowing tons of money sort of very aggressively, so he might have gotten more hurt than he would have if he'd been more conservative. And then he made a huge investment in WeWork, which ended up blowing up.
14 billion max they lost, I think. Yeah.
He had a very low point after that. and then COVID. So there are these kind of four big setbacks.
And I referred to, and you're quite right. I mean, there are other mad. I mean, why is he buying? Why is he putting? I don't know, $90 million into a dog walking app? Please, he likes dogs, by the way. Teacup
poodles. Yes.
Yeah, that's the key. If you want to get to Masa.
I loved reading about his poodles.
Yeah. So he's made some mad bets, insane, ridiculous. You know, he gets carried away. It's enthusiasms. You're right. WeWork did tremendous damage to his reputation. And I would argue, and I go into some detail about this because it's so shocking, is the mad options trading where he turns out to be the NASDAQ whale.
Could you describe what happened?
Well, it's not really because it's so damn complicated. I mean, it took me ages to write it, and I ran it by about
Pretend the options are avocados.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
and where are the oranges? No. Okay. So it's essentially, he's taking, I'll get this wrong, but I did actually understand it for about 5 minutes. By the way, he hired, and there's a Deutsche Bank subplot in this book. I mean, some of the worst people are. Nobody from Deutsche Bank here? Anyway,
are you making
there's a whole network.
There's a whole
network of them. And some of them are really nice people, by the way, but anyway.
Some of my best friends work at Deutsche Bank, all right?
Yeah. Some of your best sources, you meant. Anyway. Essentially, he takes the top tech companies that he's failed to invest in like Google, Tafangs he calls them, Tafangs. So it's Tencent, it's Alibaba, it's Google, Alphabet, it's then Facebook and Amazon and Netflix. And he takes futures trading, options, right? Not
so these are bets on the future stock price.
Bets on the future stock price. And they're gigantic positions. And he says, I described this meeting where he describes the trading strategy. And he says, you know, I'm going to do, I can't remember, was it, you know, I'm going to do a 25 billion every week. They go, what? You know, can you imagine the market disruption?
But these aren't investments in the company. These are just
they're not
speculative little trades that he's doing.
It's a total trading strategy, right? And he hopes to similarly overwhelm the market with money. But of course, when somebody sees that amount of trading, again, somebody's there. And then you start to self-correct.
But overwhelm the market to what end?
Well, I mean, it's a bit like...
What's the goal of that?
Well, isn't it bunker hunt in the silver market? I'm going to corner the market in options.
Okay.
And, you know, I'm going to move the whole market. I mean, there's questions for regulators here, by the way. But anyway, the point is, there's all the Japanese people around the table. This is a dinner in his office. And they kind of go, oh, Masa, you will be the Don of Silicon Valley. And Masa goes, it's all in Japanese, this, by the way. And Masa goes, oh, the Don of Silicon Valley. He says, no drugs, only women. And at which point, the person in the room is the women translator who has to do this. Sorry, I shouldn't be telling jokes like this. It's a true story, though. But the point is, it's mad.
Yeah,
and they find out.
And pointless? I don't understand the point of it.
He makes, well, in the short term, he makes $7 billion. He's up. And then he literally loses at a maximum $9 billion. So it's a $16 billion. I'm told they dispute, Softbank says it wasn't as high as that. And the net sum comes out of losses at $5 billion. But this isn't a matter of weeks.
But he has no business doing this. This isn't his business.
No, it's
you know,
because
it just makes no sense.
So again, just to be clear, this is where some people, very respectable people I interviewed, who are serious movers and shakers on Wall Street, would say, look, he's brilliant, but actually he's an addict. I mean, he's compulsive gambler. So I think there is something in that, by the way, and I try to convey that in the book. I just think he's more than that. And I apologize for telling I shouldn't have told that story really, but there we are. Yeah.
So I'm going to just mention in a few minutes, we are going to start a Q&A. And I've been asked to remind everyone to just stick to one question But think about your one question.
No White House correspondent questions. So
Yes.
I follow up. And
no speeches and questions. But anyway, just to go back. So, okay, he has something in him, and I don't know if this has been genetically, if there's a proven link between some gene and gambling addiction, but he definitely has a little bit of that in him, and he needs that, kind of stimulation. So I was struck by another thing. There's an incredible anecdote in the book about his. This brings me back to the allegedly about the job creation numbers, because this is why I use the word allegedly. So he met with President Trump. He's met with Trump many times, of course, but they met, I think, in 2016, right after Trump.
In Trump Tower.
Trump Tower. And so there's this great scene where they both, they have this little tete-a-tete, and they discuss the tweets.
Masa's been told, whatever you do, when you meet the president, keep it simple. Right? Keep it simple. So
140 characters or less.
50,000 jobs, 50 billion investment.
So he promises Trump he
goes, I promise 50,000 jobs, 50,000 investment, 50 billion.
So he says, I'm going to invest 50 billion
50
in
billion.
the U.S.
Yeah, 50 billion.
Yeah.
50,000
Eye-popping number.
Yeah.
Trump
great.
tweets it out before anyone's even been
Priebus
told.
is going, I think we need to know where the jobs are before, which state.
It's going to be a Foxconn plant, is that right?
Yeah, there's a Foxconn plant.
And so the Foxconn CEO didn't know about it.
No.
I mean, they're all sort of, this tweet goes out and they're all
mad.
sort of like, what? And the Saudis who have just invested all this money with Masa also get a little worked up because they're sort of like, is this what he's doing with our money? So what happened with the Foxconn plant? I'm so intrigued.
Well, what happens afterwards is, in the book, I describe how then this meeting only lasts about 25 minutes. And Trump goes off to the bathroom to just adjust his tie because all the reporters, he's going to go down and give them all the news. And he's fixing his pin, and the red tie. Masa's wearing a red tie just like Trump. And Trump then looks in the mirror and he's combing his hair back. And he looks at Masa and he says, Masa, this is how you comb your hair, like this. Failing to realize that Masa doesn't have any hair. Anyway, so what happened? I went back to SoftBank with this and said, are you sure it's 50,000? Can you prove this? Because also, where's the 100,000 going to come from?
So did they claim
they did, and they
jobs?
claim the numbers stack up. But the key caveat is we never promised 50,000 forever. And, construction jobs, right?
Right.
And then, obviously, there were layoffs during the COVID pandemic. So, net, where are we? It's not 50,000. But they reckon they can get to 50 billion if you include the Sprint investment. And it's also what was in the pipeline. I mean, you have to look in the fine print. Is the answer.
I see some similarities between President Trump and Masa in terms of some of their personalities, their interests, their love of the big announcement.
Yeah.
They both love the big announcement.
The big boast, the big numbers. But above all, I think it's all about the comeback. I mean, Masa's a great comeback kid. I mean, whatever you think of President Trump, he's a comeback kid. Silence. But no, I think there is some, and they kind of, cut corners occasionally, There's, but they're great salesmen. They're great, big, outsized personalities who they've got big mouths, right? He's known, by the way, in Japan as one of the 3 big mouths.
Oh, God. That doesn't seem like a compliment in Japan. Seems like a...
Well, the other guy is the guy that runs Fast Retailing and Uniqlo, which is a pretty damn good company, was on SoftBank's board. And the other one, I can't remember, got into a bit of financial difficulty. But they have all these great nicknames. Anyway,
So thank you for that. So we're going to start questions. John has the microphone. He's going to bring it so we have a hand over here. One question, please. Thank you.
Could you say something about his personal family life?
Yeah.
Good question.
Okay, that's a great question.
Barely mentioned in the text.
Yeah,
Barely.
because he's a very, very secretive person, a very private person. And so I had to judge how far to look at this in where it was relevant. So he has two daughters. They're not publicly named. They're very secret. I heard things which I could talk about, but they're not in the book, so they're not really relevant. I mean, they've got kids. But I do write in the book about, he's asked about succession. He says, the problem is I don't have any sons. The person goes, what? But you got two daughters, right? I mean, it just
sort of weird.
Figured. Yeah, it is. I mean, that's, again, rather a certain type. I do write about the marriage, the wife. I write about when he got very sick. He got hepatitis B. His wife had a young child, was pregnant with a second. He was very scary. He was given 5 years to live. That's another motivation thing. And I think the other area was, you know, his sort of properties and wealth. And that could get a little bit tricky, but let's say he has extensive properties, and I describe some of them in detail on the grounds that that's where he does business, so they're relevant. But in other respects, you know, you also have to have a certain careful respect for cultural differences. You know, I wasn't doing a book about his private life, all his private life. I thought it was trying to do a book about how his standing and how he conducts himself as a businessman, how he runs his company, how other people on the other side of deals and all that. But, you know, let's say work takes up a lot of time.
I imagine he's away a lot. Questions? We have one in the back, and then we'll come up here. Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Barber. So I have a quick question with regards of the researcher that you mentioned, right? As you mentioned, by 1 year in the research for this book, you were kind of stuck. So I was just curious, what's the name of this researcher?
Simon Lee.
Okay.
His rates are pretty good.
Right, and also what you mentioned that he's quite brilliant. So
yeah, he's
I'm
brilliant.
just curious.
Yeah, he's late 20s. I think, I'm just going back, I think probably it would be right to say about 8 months. You know, and I went to Stanford because I wanted to go to Berkeley where he'd been a student, and I needed to find, I also got some help, which I acknowledge in the book. Stanford Business School was incredibly helpful, and a professor at venture finance, who's co-written a very good book, Ilya Stribalayev, he was incredibly helpful on valuations and things. But the key was I asked Simon to look at original Japanese sources. So there are several books. Some of them are, shall we say, mixed. Some of them are more stenography than biography in the sense of you just write down what you're told kind of thing. But there are a couple of other books which, particularly one which goes into deep detail, two books which were very valuable. One which goes into deep detail about his Korean background and his family and the relatives and what was going on and the money. And then there's another book which was by a Japanese investigative journalist who I met, who was much more cooperative than, shall we say, some of the others. And he had done deep research into what Masa was up to during the bursting of the bubble. And Simon was able to translate that. He was also able, which is in the book, to discover, because this Masa's home is supposedly a state secret. And, you know, it's the one I described with the artificial golf course in the basement. And it's 3 conjoining houses in Tokyo. And everybody said, you know, you'll never find it. So we could find it on the internet, sort of. It's one Asian visitor described it as the Wayne Manor. It's like the Batman's cave, you know. Anyway, Simon found the original planning document because the whole street had to be ripped up, and it's a giant development, and there was some local protests. But by finding the original planning document, I was able to describe in precise detail how big this place was and everything else, which was, that was quite a feat. I thought Simon did well on that.
Quite fascinating.
So in terms of his vision of AI and, you know, the his initiative. Where do you think he thinks the value is? Where is it headed? Is it in like the singularity, or where is it? Do you think the ultimate play is? Because he's a visionary, right?
Yeah, in his vision, he's been talking about singularity and this moment when the robots become smarter than you and I, or certainly me. He's talked about it for at least 25 years. But it's all been in this rather grand vision stuff. And when he had the money to invest in the AI, deep AI companies, or these emerging companies, like Sam Altman's OpenAI, he kind of was distracted with all this other stuff. And, WeWork. And so I think that was a lesson. And he got much more into it when he retired from the public eye, ostensibly doing penance for his losses. But he's plotting a comeback around it. Now, how does he see the money? I think it is in he's a guy who spots bottlenecks. He's brilliant at that. And he's applying the same game plan that he did in the internet. He's sort of the picks and shovels. It's the commercial applications. So, he will be into, driverless cars, but he's also into the energy that supplies the data centers. He's also, trying to find companies that have got good commercial applications. So it's in the infrastructure rather than some super product. The exception, because he's got ARM, is if he goes into the manufacturing this super chip, even if he outsources, that's a kind of game-changing move for him.
So I think we have a woman here with a mask on, and then we'll come forward. Yeah.
I was curious, having studied his life, where you think his confidence and audacity comes from, especially as a Zainichi Korean. And I am actually Zainichi Korean myself, and I find that, especially in this community of marginalized people in Japan, it's very rare to see that kind of personality.
Yeah.
So I was just curious to ask.
Well, I'm privileged to be asked that question because I defer to you. I mean, I don't speak. My research was Zainichi Korean. So this is the technical term for the Korean Japanese, and I think that he really was treated like a princeling when he was growing up. I also think that he was inspired by his grandmother, who was a seriously strong figure, who helped had an entrepreneurial spirit. And above all, I think he was liberated by that experience of going to America, and he learned that self-confidence, was brought out at a key age. The formative years is in the late teens. So coming back, and then having the imagination to understand, if I go back to Japan and I speak fluent English, and I'm kind of a quite confident guy, I can be the gateway for all these other companies. So, then once he's made the first decision to go into software, he starts riding this wave, so it sort of feeds on itself. So I do think his character is quite unusual, and he's not necessarily representative. I mean, certainly Simon is not a big extrovert like Masa, and I think even he was breathtaking reading about him. But thank you for that question.
Okay.
Thank you. Obviously, Son has a very ambivalent kind of relationship with Japan and his Japanese-ness or Korean-ness, whatever. Did you get a sense, Lionel, of what Son thinks about Japan? Japan's been through the so-called lost decades. He's had his ups and downs in Japan, but he lives in Japan. You might well have expected someone like Son to have ended up, living in Silicon Valley or, Malibu or somewhere.
I think he really wanted to make it in Japan, and I think, this notion that he's ambivalent about Japan is, I'm not quite sure. I think he overdoes sometimes the patriotism. He picks up, models like Sakamoto Ryoma, the great samurai, reformer, warrior, entrepreneur, the mid-19th century. And he almost sort of overcompensates. And he's in Fukushima episode where he mentioned, he's sort of saying, I want to do this, and this is my great moment. But I think that's more about wanting to be accepted. I don't accept, I won't name him because I think it's not fair, it was a private conversation, but I did ask a very famous Japanese business person, why could I not sit down with him and talk about Masa? And he really clearly didn't want to. And I tried a couple of times, and then you realize, there is a word in Japanese called no. It's just, anyway. And I said, well, what's the one question you'd ask him? And he looked at me straight-faced and said, just ask him why he hates Japan so much. I don't believe that. I think that was a total slander. I think he's really worked hard to engender a kind of venture spirit, entrepreneurs in Japan. I think he's been a huge disruptor, but for the good. And he talks about Japan's position falling back after the 1980s. And by the way, he's very popular in the Japanese retail investment community. I mean, he's seen as a kind of breath of fresh air. So if he's ambivalent, then maybe and I never really, I'm being very candid here. I mean, I did 4 interviews, maybe spent 9 hours with him. I never saw that glint or that because you have to, he spoke English to me, by the way. It wasn't in Japanese through an interpreter. But I'm pretty good. I've interviewed a lot of people. I've interviewed people who've got a lot of money. I've interviewed people who've got a lot of power. And I think I would have spotted if he'd gone kind of dark when he was talking about Japan. I mean, he is a good actor, but he wants to make, he passionately believes in kind of disrupting technological progress. So for all those reasons, I haven't answered your question. No, I think I have a slightly different take on him. I think he just wants to be accepted.
So we have, just hang on for the mic.
And somebody said, by the way, the thing about Masa, because I'm always asking what motivates, what's he like? But one of the best comments was he's just got a giant chip on his shoulder.
Good evening, Mr. Barber. And so obviously Alibaba was a huge success. However, large-scale investment in China due to the political climate is quite difficult at the moment. What do you think is influence right now, like in China or in near future potentially with China?
I mean, like many foreigners, it's very small. And I write about in the book that he got quite a bit of pressure in Washington to kind of choose. You've got all this Alibaba stock, you're invested in ByteDance, you're in this, Didi. Well, you want to buy all these sensitive American companies. You're in Sprint, Boston Dynamics, Fortress, etc. He's getting trouble with CFIUS. He had his clock cleaned in 2016, 17. Softbank didn't have any proper lobbying. So he told me in the last interview, I've chosen the West, I've chosen America. Now, I think, again, if I'm, being very candid, I think obviously he's still got that stake in ByteDance. I mean, it's down. He's realized you can't really play in peak globalization. You can't have 2 big feet in both camps. But overall, I mean, it was very interesting, by the way, who was in China the day that the big Stargate announcement was made? Any? Jensen, exactly. Jensen Huang of NVIDIA. And that tells you something.
And then we're going to have one more after this.
Hi, Mr. Barber. Nice to meet you. I'm curious because you have met a lot of powerful men and women with a lot of money throughout your career. So I'm curious, when you were writing the book, what surprised you most? Were there any things that surprised you?
I couldn't believe his risk appetite. I just could not believe how he bet the farms, time and again. And then the other thing was his it was less surprise. I was just had a niggle. Have I got what makes this person tick? And that, in the end, I just came down to the view, it's just he's an outsider and he's really suffered prejudice and that's the motivating force. But, you know, yeah, the surprise, I think it's the risk appetite. I mean, it's extra galaxy.
Inhuman.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just couldn't even begin to understand that.
So we have someone in the first row back there who's been waving at me. Yeah. I think right here. Yeah. Sorry. It's like choosing between your children. I'm sorry.
Hi. Thanks so much for the talk. I know you've had lunch with a couple interesting people in your time, and yet you chose Son to write a book on. Do you feel like he's just a renegade, an outlier, or he's really emblematic of the spirit of our times?
I think he represents a great deal of the spirit of the times in terms of riding a technological wave. I think in terms of leverage, borrowing, record low interest rates, very specific period. You know, it lasted about 30 years, and you know, bubbles. I mean, there's one chapter I call Bubble Man. Why did I write about him? Because I think I began to better appreciate how far he was a creature of our times, and this was a story of our times. And I tried to tell the story in the background in the book because context is very important. But I wrote the book. When people ask me why did I do it, there's one word answer, which is money. And everybody thinks I'm talking about the movie. But I'm not. I'm talking about his money.
Oh,
I mean, it's just gigantic sums of money. You know, tens of billions, not millions or hundreds of millions. And I figured, and I was right, that the old adage in business journalism, and you know about that, Sheelah, is if there's money, there's always story. There's always just follow the money. And the characters who've gravitated towards him, and by the way, he's made a lot of people rich, which is why they're either under the NDA or they flock to you because everybody wants to know, how do I get as rich as these people? And he's done that. He's spread a lot of wealth around, other people's money, it's invested, etc. And then he's made, you know, a lot of people lots of money. I mean, stupendous amounts of money. So for that reason, I just figured I'm bound to I'm just bound to come across some really interesting characters. And I love people. I like writing about people. You know, you can't write books about Wither Europe.
That'll be your next one. Okay, Lionel Barber, thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Sheelah.
this talk. It was so great.
Thank you very much.